Somebody called Kirby Smart a maniac this week at SEC Media Days, and I get it. I'm around Kirby Smart a lot because of this job. I don't get to hang out with Kirby Smart or see him like in private rooms and in private settings and what it's like behind the scenes. But look, people can see it on TV, the passion, the fire, the energy, to quote Kirby Smart himself, that he brings to the table for this Georgia football program. And I do think that that is different than other places. You've got to be passionate to be successful in a lot of things, but especially in sports. But he also brings that fire, and he brings just that emphatic energy that, look, not every successful coach does that. Not everybody's like him, right? Bill Belichick, a little bit more reserved, obviously won a lot of Super Bowls. Um, Kirby is a very particular cat. And he's a very smart person. He's a very passionate person. He's very, very detail oriented, and he's a very unique person, right? Stop. The kids would say I'm glazing. It's really just calling it how it is. But let's get into what the Texas defensive back Michael Taft had to say about Kirby Smart this week at Media Days and how it's part of why Georgia is successful. He goes, Coach Kirby Smart is one of the most competitive coaches I've ever been against in my life. Like, physically hearing him on the sideline when I'm playing defense, I'm like, who is this maniac? Excuse me, I don't say the word like that much, but Taffy did, and I was just quoting him directly. But look, Georgia played Texas twice a year ago in the 2025 season. When Texas hosted Georgia, and they were the number one team in the country, and Georgia entered that game number 5, they had been beaten by Alabama a few weeks before that. Everybody really wrote Georgia off heading into that game. Everybody on College Game Day picked Texas, right? Kirby Smart gave the network flack for that after the game. I picked Texas to win that game. The people of Dawg Post picked Texas to win that game. At that point in time, Texas looked pretty unstoppable. They had the best offense and defensive team statistically in the country at that point in time. Things looked different than they did after that game. I think that it was taken personally by Georgia. I think that Kirby Smart, kind of better than anybody, does a good job of taking whatever it is. It could be something that he just forms out of midair. It could be real doubt. It could be things that I'm saying, the media is saying, pundits are saying, whatever, and using it as any sort of fuel. Georgia is notoriously good at that. Kirby is notoriously good at just using anything that they can get their hands on as fuel to play better, as fuel to do well, as fuel to prove people wrong. And they did that against Texas. There's more to the quote from the defensive back from the Longhorns. Real quick, dogpost.com. Make sure you're checking that out. Make sure you're sticking to this channel. We got all sorts of deals going on. There's a shirt with Dean, Matt, and my face on it. If you want a Riding Home t-shirt, you can see all that on the Red Zone, one of our sponsors. So make sure you're checking all that out, and there are some links in the description of this video. This is the rest of the quote. He's talking about how he thinks Kirby's a maniac, and then he goes, and it's their head coach trying to, get a call or get something in, and I think the team's embodied by the head coach, and he does a great job of embodying what their team is all about. And to be honest, I think that they out-physicaled us in that first game. So we got to come with a physical nature and a sense of pride in knowing that if we want to get to where we want to go in December, then we got to beat those guys. He's talking about Georgia. So the first half of the Georgia-Texas game out in Austin last October was one of the most impressive displays, one of the most impressive performances by a unit that I had seen in the sport all year long. And that was what the front seven for Georgia, and honestly the entire defense, did to the Texas offense out there in the first half. The pass rush, the run stop, the interceptions, the sacks, the strip sacks, they were all over them. The line shifts and the different blitz packages, Georgia out-physicaled them, and they looked stronger, and they looked faster. Kirby over and over discusses how this is a very physical conference, and that Every time they play Kentucky, he talks about how physical of a game it's going to be. Every time they talk about Auburn or talk about Alabama or any team in the SEC, Kirby talks about how physical of a game it's going to be. It's going to be between two teams that are really strong and really big and really fast, and the line of scrimmages are going to really determine how things go in the game. That is what happened in this Texas game. That is what happened between the Dogs and the Longhorns out in Austin. It'll be in Athens this November. Was that Georgia out-physicaled Texas. They looked stronger. They just looked better at the line of scrimmage. Jalen Walker was winning against Kelvin Banks, both first-round picks. Michael Williams was winning on the edge. Damon Wilson, Chris Cole, they were winning. Dalen Everett was winning his battles, right? Famously forced 2 turnovers in that game. They beat the quarterback to the sidelines when they wanted to escape. From a performance by a unit, it was one of the best I had seen in the sport all season. And I don't think that can happen if Kirby is not a quote-unquote maniac. And I don't think it happens if this team doesn't have all of this fuel that it's using to make it want to be better. Whether it is Lee Corso putting on the Texas Longhorn head, I don't know the name of the mascot for the actual mascot, putting that head on, or Desmond Howard saying there's a new sheriff in town in the SEC beforehand. If it's everyone picking Texas against them, but they use that, and I think it legitimately fuels them to do better. Once it got to the SEC championship later on between these two teams that people are projecting to be in the same exact spot this coming season, it was a physical matchup again, and it was similar. These are teams that could put up 40 points in a game. They had high-powered offenses at times during the season, right? For Georgia, not quite much as Texas did. But when they played each other, it was low scoring, and they were defensive battles. In the SEC championship, there was no touchdown scored in that first half. It was a physical game at the line of scrimmage. And then when Gunnar Stockton got in the game for Georgia, the script really changed, and it became a power running type of scheme where Georgia won out because of that. It goes back to that physical nature. So people like to get on to Kirby for the coach speak because he is a coach that uses a lot of coach speak, and he says a lot of cliches and things of that nature, but I think that he really means it a lot of the time. And when he talks about being physical and being just having that fire, passion, and energy, that he's been talking about over and over throughout this offseason, I think that there is certainly truth to all of that. And he's not just making that up. If they play with that, then they typically do better. I always get taken back to that offseason, the 2022 offseason. Georgia's coming off that first national championship in the back-to-back run, and they were projected to be one of the best handful of teams in college football, but not necessarily the favorite to win it all. Well, this team took anything that people said and used it as fuel, and they started making things up. You had Nolan Smith going around telling everybody that people thought that Georgia was going to go 7-5 in 2022. I didn't predict that myself. I didn't see any other Georgia people predict that, or really anyone in general predict that. But that's how they talked about it. They talked about it as if people thought they were going to miss the playoff and barely make a bowl game. That was ridiculous because of all the returning talent Georgia had. But they used that as fuel. Stetson Bennett against Tennessee that season used the fuel that the Tennessee fan base gave him the night before by leaking his number and calling him thousands of times. He used it as fuel. He was pissed about it, and you could see it in the way that they played, and you could see it in the way that he celebrated that touchdown against Tennessee. He goes, call me. He's staring at their sideline. He was mad. I remember him telling me later on that season how mad he was and frustrated he was with that Tennessee fan base for doing that. This program uses any little thing that it can possibly find as fuel to play better, and I think that embodies the fire, passion, energy that Kirby's talking about. I think that to an extent what Michael Taffy's saying is true. Kirby Smart can be a maniac. You see him screaming on the sidelines. You see him, it looks like a blood vessel is going to pop in his face. That is the Georgia football program when it's at its best. And it was at its best last year when it was beating the Texas Longhorns a couple of times. Thank you for watching this video. Links are down below in the description. Thank you.